Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. Friday, the Friday before Labor Day. I don't know whether we're going to be on Monday. Probably will, knowing Mike and I, we don't have lives. We just have mouths that we like to run and a world that's interesting to comment on. So this is my last broadcast of the week from the deep South. Well, or I don't know if it's the deep South, from a northern Vermont perspective.
We haven't even gotten to the South yet.
From the South, from the deep state swamp known as Washington, D.C., where I am in the process of packing up my hotel and getting ready to hop on a train and go back to God's country, which is New England. A report yesterday on the sentencings of Joe Biggs and Zach Rehl.
Wait. Let's keep it up for a second. Happy Friday, everybody. And happy Friday to Wolfpack Nation. Go Pack. Go Pack. Because what did I call them, Norm? I think I said that we went up to Connecticut and I think the Wolfpack were playing the University of Manhattan at Suburbs. Is that what UConn is called these days? Anyway.
Man, I've never been a fan of the UConn football program, although I live in Connecticut and have for many years. I have playfully called for disbanding the football program as an embarrassment to the nutmeg state. This year in the local press, we were promised things would be different this year. We were coming out swinging and we were going to make a difference. Well, maybe next week.
Yeah, I think next week they play like the school of I don't know. Anyway, they don't play anybody worth a damn.
I think no. I've just got it right here. Next week they're playing the transgender Cosmopolitan U, and so these are all guys who became women so that they could work in cosmetology shops and play with women's hair lawfully and work on fingernails. So it should be a great game, and it might be competitive.
Yeah, well, you see there on the screen for us who will be playing on Saturday, September 9th, Notre Dame. So anyway, there's a huge difference between the programs. They'd like to have you think otherwise, but go Pack, Wolfpack forever. We bleed all over that puppy blue. And congrats to the University of Manhattan at Suburbs for thinking that they had a second.
I'll be returning to Connecticut within the day, so I'm sure that the team will be calling me for some inspirational words of wisdom, and my comments will be play basketball. That's what you're good at. So anyhow, let's get back.
Hold on, Matt. We are celebrating a 10-point victory. First of all, it's the first regular season game. So going into hostile territory with a program who's got a coach talking everything up with a bunch of players that that believe that they can do things that they really can't, right? Working out the kinks. Other programs don't really, have competitive games as their first game. So we're going to celebrate this and we're going to build into Notre Dame. So we are. Go Pack. Plus you're a UNC fan. So hang out.
And tomorrow, of course, all eyes will be on University of Michigan at East Carolina in that pivotal test in Ann Arbor.
Man, several years ago,
East Carolina. What is that? Is that the guys behind the dumpster at the trailer park?
Oh, you're gonna make Pirate Nation real angry here in a second. We better.
Oh, you're taking pokes at Connecticut. Let me take some pokes at Carolina. Trailer.
You don't even know where East Carolina is, man. That's dangerous territory down there in Greenville.
I don't know where East Carolina is. I'll probably not be there. If I come to visit you down south, I'm going to require a bodyguard and a translator. Years ago, I had a case in Tennessee involving some people who might be violent, and so I had to hire a bodyguard to tootle me around while we interviewed witnesses. And we ended up in a trailer park outside of Knoxville one night, and there was a guy who was going to tell me things I needed to know. So we go into the trailer park, and it was sparsely furnished. There was a couch, but a spittoon. And so this fellow with more chaw in his mouth than teeth starts telling me what I need to know. Well, that good old boy down there, and then he did him up. So I listened to him for about 3 minutes and couldn't understand a word he said. And I finally looked at my bodyguard and I was overcome with the fumes from the spittoon. And I said, we're done here. And to this day, I don't know what that witness had to say. And I'm thinking, Mike, if those are your neighbors, man, oh man, maybe you
play. Yeah, of course those are my neighbors. How do you think I stay safe out here, Norm?
Yeah. I can't wait to get back to New England.
Mari says East Carolina is due east of Western Carolina, which is in Cullowhee, by the way. Western Carolina University is Cullowhee, North Carolina. East Carolina is Greenville. But if you had said that about East Carolina several years ago, it would have been a much different story. That program has actually been nationally times, and I believe they may have had a big win over Michigan in recent memory, but I know App State has.
North
Carolina is a dangerous place for you to be talking shit about, you know?
I will never forget the 2007 football season when Appalachian State rolled into Ann Arbor and handed it to them, and we never recovered. It took a decade or more for that football team to recover. But I don't expect a similar shock tomorrow. So I'm glad that we've got college football back. I'm glad we've got the pro game coming. I registered my team for fantasy football today. And my favorite team name, however, belongs to Jacqueline Polverari. She's got Victoria's Secrets. So, we'll be competing against those psychedelic bra straps every week. And
we're just waiting on two invitees to accept their invites. One is none other than Lawyer Will. So Lawyer Will, get your life together, sir.
Yeah, really, seriously.
Go ahead and get in here. And then the other one is our favorite, Dawn McNeil. So, Dawn, please go ahead, accept the invite. Those are in your email. Once you do that, we can get the draft scheduled. You won't hold everybody up. Not that you're holding everybody up now, but you're holding everybody up right now.
Well, doesn't Dawn live in California? So that, there is that. But in any case, let's talk about the Proud Boys. So, yesterday was sentencing. And it was an unusual day. Joe Biggs and others had been convicted of seditious conspiracy and related crimes for going into the Capitol on January 6th. The government came out swinging yesterday. They asked the judge to enhance the sentencing under the sentencing guidelines to have the men declared as terrorists because they destroyed government property in the course of their crimes. And the judge obliged, feeling he had no choice. That destruction of property was one of the predicate offenses for that enhancement, right up there with assassinating and murdering public officials, downing aircrafts, using nuclear weapons, engaging in acts of mass destruction, and blowing up buildings. I suggested that was a little rich. The judge didn't say he disagreed, but he felt his hands were tied. The law was written in such a way that he would apply the guidelines. So suddenly their recommended sentences under the guidelines went through the roof. Zach Rehl was facing 30 years to life, and Joe Biggs was facing, I think, 28 years to 45 or something. I can't remember the upper range. And so the government asked the judge to impose a 30-year sentence as to Zach Rehl and a 33-year sentence as to Joe Biggs. We argued that those sentences were excessive. And at the end of, we argued them one at a time. Biggs was in the morning, Rehl was in the afternoon. And I saved for the end of my sentencing presentation as to Biggs the following argument. Judge, one of your functions under the sentencing guidelines is to promote respect for the law. Draconian sentences in this range won't do that. It'll do the opposite. Many people are watching these sentences and feeling these proceedings and feeling much the same way people did when they watched the federal government respond to the siege at Waco. What was going to happen? How was it going to end? Were the officers going to be able to execute their search warrant for those guns? Nobody expected 86 people, including scores of children, to be burned to death by a federal raid that went bad and a reaction that spawned a lot of cynicism of government. I said, if you look back at polls on confidence in government, they began to decline as a result of Waco. Well, in the end, then, the judge listened. I don't think he was too happy about the remarks. People who were present in that packed courtroom said that it was a sort of jaw-dropping moment. But in the end, the judge imposed a sentence of 17 years on Joe Biggs. And later in the afternoon, we made a similar argument on behalf of Zach Rehl. And the government asked again for 30 years. The judge imposed a sentence of 15. So the Justice Department got half of what it wanted in a case in which it overcharged. And plenty of people online were celebrating. I've received any number of texts and notes saying the sentences were just right. You're a loser, this, that, and everything else. They're entitled to their opinion. I'm happy to occupy space in their head. But my position is these cases were obscenely overcharged. Misdemeanors would have done, a year or two would have done. But what they've done basically is heightened the legitimacy crisis in this country. And I think Merrick Garland is out of his mind. And the Waco comparison is apt. At a time when there is a statistical dead heat between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he of facing 4 indictments at the state and federal level. Nobody is asking the critical question in this country: what's going on in the coal mine? Why do we get these canaries tweeting the way they do? And how are we going to build a country? Build bridges to build a country over our divisions. I don't know that I have the answers, but I know what the answers are not. And the answers are not demonizing people who believed the sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump, in 2020, when he stood on the ellipse on January 6th and told people the election had been stolen and told them they needed to fight for their country. 74 million people voted for that man. Tens of millions of them are prepared to vote for him again. And they're not voting for him because he's the guy they'd want to take to dinner or they think he necessarily has a good character. They're voting for him because they're telling them things that correspond to their sense of felt reality in this country. And that felt reality is we're circling a drain. And unless something stops soon, we'll all be swallowed within it. And Merrick Garland is tap dancing on this drain. He's tap dancing on the grave of the American spirit. And that sound you heard yesterday were spade of the thud, thud, thud in the courtroom were spadefuls of dirt being tossed onto the coffin of the American dream, because the Proud Boys, in my view, made mistakes. Certainly they committed crimes. Certainly they trespassed. Certainly they disturbed peace. But to call them insurrectionists and then to call them terrorists is an obscene misapplication of the law that the Justice Department needs to own. As we were leaving court yesterday, one of the prosecutors turned to me and said, we're very concerned about your comments about Waco. You need to be careful with that. You need to own it. And I said, seriously, why? And I thought about it overnight, and I'll double down on it. This was a Waco moment in American politics. And to continue to prosecute hundreds of Americans, more indictments coming every week, crowding jail cells with people who went on a cry for felt necessity on January 6th and who interfered with the orderly transfer of power by delaying the electoral count by 8 hours and by pretending this was an existential threat to democracy and chilling people and sending out shockwaves throughout the American system such that people who are inclined to dissent are now afraid to speak. That looks like the regime in power trying to silence dissent. And as I said any number of times in the sentencing arguments yesterday, I don't want to live in fear of my government. I want my government to wonder what I'll be doing next. And that has been the American dream. That has been the American spirit. If you're looking for reasons to decide which party to vote for, I would say voting Merrick Garland and his team out of office in the Justice Department is mission number 1, 2, or 3 on the agenda for 2024. Merrick Garland and his team are authoritarian, in my view. They view the one of the remarks I made in sentencing yesterday, trust and obey isn't the national anthem. It's a fundamentalist Christian camp song. And when my government comes in here and tells the judge or a court that it needs to send a message to people, that message shouldn't be blind obedience. And the government does need to be wary of the people. That was the message that was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. That was the message that was enshrined in our Bill of Rights. That's the message of the Ninth Amendment. We, the people, retain power. In the afternoon sentencing argument, I reminded the judge of the importance of John Locke in the American tradition, and when Locke talked about the appeal to heaven, when John Locke talked about sovereignty remaining in the people, when Jefferson said that a revolution every 19 years, every generation or so was a good thing. This is what we're taught in school. This is what we read. And on January 6, 2021, some people read it, they believed it, and they act on it. And now they're called terrorists. When did it become a terrorist to believe that we, the people, created this government? When did you become a terrorist to believe that there are unenumerated powers that belong to the people? When did it become a terrorist when did we become terrorists by reading Thomas Jefferson? I'm just not buying it, Merrick. It's time for you to pack your bags and get the hell out of Dodge.
Can you talk a little bit about the judge's remarks as the sentences were being handed down, respectively, to Biggs and Rehl? But I think with particular respect for Biggs, I was seeing reporting that Biggs had obviously expressed contrition. And we have to recall that he's been in solitary for how long now?
a good part of the 2+ years that he's been.
Yeah, I think in excess of 2 years at this point.
It depends. They get moved around, and sometimes they're in general population, sometimes they're not. But for well more than a year, maybe approaching 2 years. Yes.
Yeah, Joe has a 7-year-old daughter now. She was, I think, 4-ish when all of this began. And what I found interesting was these, reports of that the judge said something to the effect to Joe that he had other remedies of expressing his frustration, i.e., petitioning his government, reaching out to elected leaders and politicians rather than showing up in D.C. on January 6th. And can you confirm a little bit about the message that I'm conveying to the?
Yeah, you've got it partially right and partially not, and and I'm not going to be hostile to Judge Kelly. Judge Kelly did his best to apply the law as he understood it. He and I may have disagreements, but he's been appointed, wears the robe, and that's what appellate courts are for. And I'm in the appeal for Joe and Zach, and very much looking forward to perfecting it and arguing it. But what he did say is, and he said this to both men. We're the envy of the world in the United States. We have certain rights. You have the right to select your presidential candidate, to persuade others to vote for him. You have the right to vote. You have the right to go to court and seek justice. You have the right to rally peacefully. You have the right to assemble peacefully. But with those rights come certain responsibilities, and you cannot do what you did. He didn't say storm the Capitol, but engage in the behavior that led to your convictions on January 6th. And for that, you will be punished. And, yes and no, Judge. We do have all of those rights, and I don't know that we are the envy of the world any longer. But many of those rights are imperiled right now, in part because of judicial behavior. The right of access to the courts has been denied in fundamental ways, and people on both the right and the left would agree that qualified immunity, that is shielding public officials from accountability in a courtroom as a result of judicial decree, doesn't help foster a sense of legitimacy or participatory democracy. Then there's the political question doctrine that would keep a person from raising a political question in the courts, and the courtroom doors are closed. Sometimes an appeal sometimes the appeal to candidly violence is the American way. And in 2020, for example, in the summer, and I did say this to the court at one point, I watched about 15 seconds of the riot on January 6th. I got a call from a good friend, Jim Nugent, said, "You got to watch this. There's a coup going on in DC." And I turned the television on, and it was no coup. Nobody sees the media. Nobody sees the military. There was no alternative government in place. There was no plan to replace the government. The so-called insurrectionists weren't even armed. It was a riot gone bad, people angry and acting out and expressing their anger in shocking ways, in ways that did delay the transfer of power, in ways that were a significant moment in American history. But to call it a national disgrace, as Judge Kelly did, I disagree. I might have called it an effervescent moment where the anger of the people boiled over, and those governing were given pause to think, are we doing a good enough job? Are there voices we're not hearing? Are these canaries telling us the coal mine is darker than we think? And, so Kelly said to these guys, basically, look, Civics 101 says you should go and hold a card. Hell no, we won't go.
I think what I was pointing out is,
let me just round this point out. I said to the judge, what I was far more worried about going into major cities in 2020 when I saw arsonists, when I saw people running for federal office, contributing to the bond money of arsonists, burning businesses that I frequented. And that is what inspired a lot of the rage in 2021. And that sort of double dealing, that sort of, no pun intended, left-handed application of the rule of law is what has a simmering rage boiling across the country. And ignoring it and pretending you can put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound and staunch the bleeding, we do so at our peril. So,
it was a tough day. That's precisely the sort of gaslighting that I was hoping that you could speak to, because that's what it appears as coming through, second and third hand accounts from reporters who are putting things on X and writing articles. Just the small sound bites that we read, we have to know that these are small things phrased in a longer article, but these are conversations that are happening in real time for hours at a time in your case. But it does appear that sort of posturing from the bench is just really rich when the spirit of what occurred on January 6th was precisely because of that sort of obvious double standard, right, as applied to certain groups and not others.
Well, there was a subtext to the Proud Boys trial that the court ignored yesterday and the prosecution ignored. The prosecution stood up and made it sound as though the jury concluded these men engaged in an elaborate conspiracy planned for weeks, if not months. And of course, their closing argument told the jury this conspiracy could have been formed instantaneously, even after the first barricade was stormed. So they hedged their bets and then over-presented their case at the time of sentencing. I think that, I reminded the court that American history has been violent. And when I was coming up in the 60s and 70s, the Weather Underground was engaged in bombings multiple times per week, sometimes multiple times per day. As I was growing up, I saw leaders I read about in the paper assassinated. I saw their assassins assassinated on national television, watching Jack Ruby kill Lee Harvey Oswald. We lived in violent times then, far more violent than we do now. And so the attempt to use government to suppress every expression of dissent in terms as savage as were done in the J6 cases was and continues to be, in my view, a national outrage. And it's going to make matters worse because if you're inspired to protest, now you're worried. If I go to a protest and it becomes violent, will they troll through my internet? And will my incendiary remarks, will these comments on this podcast be used to support me as to prosecute me as an insurrectionist? And it's a question everybody has to think about now. And we have to think about it now because the Justice Department is out of control. Its January 6th prosecution team needs to be replaced. It is a passionate monster that is devouring substantial parts of the American public and chilling the American spirit.
Yeah, and what you just described is terrifying to me, thinking about the ever increasingly online world in which we live, and that tech and social media is ubiquitous, and something, a Justice Department under the leadership of someone like a Merrick Garland can make it a point to just sort of put a collage of your speech over the course of X number of years together to paint a very specific picture to meet a very specific criminal end. And that's what this case ultimately, I think, is showing the door to be opened in this case. And that is a complete imbalance of, the state monopoly on violence, right? And the enforcement of our laws and the rights of a free people to speak and to not have that speech used against them when it's definitely unconnected to something that may later occur.
I love this count. You're my gyro. If UConn stormed the Capitol,
you're my hero.
I think they might have stumbled up the steps and cracked their heads, and there wouldn't have been anything to police. Dawn McNeil writes, maybe Joe Biggs will get a teaching job at a major university like the Weather Underground. Look, times change. The riddle of one of the great mysteries of life is the creation of public authority. In the United States, we say it's done with the consent of the people, but candidly, most of us don't consent to be governed as we are. We acquiesce to the institutions that surround us, and we pretend that we've consented. And there are times when those institutions just don't serve the felt necessity of the times, and at that point, we reclaim our heritage and say, I don't consent. And sometimes it gets violent. And when it does, those who govern ought not to say, get out that sledgehammer, get out, and bang these people on the head. What they ought to do is listen and say, what's broken and how can we fix it? Because the J6 prosecutions haven't ended the national crisis in the United States. They've driven it underground in the same way that Waco woke up many people and said, we've got a federal government that was supposed to be one of enumerated powers, and now they're burning buildings with children in it to serve a search warrant. WTF is going on around here, and I think we're at that moment. But let's, I guess
before we leave, just a minor technical point here that I think is relevant, and I wanted to shine some light on it. Over on our Rumble channel, Jackson Barrett makes the statement that the transfer of power actually takes place on the 20th. and that's in relation to the Judge Kelly's remarks about, the tradition of the peaceful transfer of power. These events occurred, of course, on January 6th. I know it's a technical distinction, but that sort of thing is not lost on me because the votes were certified at 1 p.m. Eastern time on January 6th as scheduled, and the transfer of power occurred on the 20th. But even so, the transfer of power, as it were, doesn't take place until 2 weeks later. So
yeah, great point, Jackson. And also, another point that's been missed on the public at large is that on January 6th, when a joint session of Congress was called for the purpose of counting and certifying electoral votes, the Capitol Police Department was recharged with responsibility for security of the building. The testimony at the trial, the Proud Boys trial, was that they expected the certification process to take days. And so they were not fully staffed on January 6th. They rationed the staff so that people could be present for 24 hours a day for 2, 3, 4 days, however long it took. We had an 8-hour delay in a process that was expected to last days. Now, Judge Kelly and the Justice Department would say it was terrifying, horrible things could have happened. And yes, there was civil disorder, and there should have been prosecutions for that. And those prosecutions undoubtedly were misdemeanors, and there may have been a few felonies tossed in there. But the bottom line is those people should have been charged, sentenced, and served their time by now. Because, in the Civil War, when 600,000 Americans killed one another in the bloodiest conflict we've ever had on this soil, 3 years after the fact, most everybody had been repatriated, and we went on to the business of building a nation. Right now, we're circling a drain. And we're continuing to lock people up for long periods of time for an episodic act of violence that did not pose a fundamental threat to democratic institutions. And to suggest, and one of the things I said to Kelly yesterday, people talk about this as posing a threat to institutions. Consider what the president was saying. He was saying that the will of the people had been thwarted and that an election had been stolen. And he said it for months. And he said it from the ellipse, not just blocks away from this location. And he said it to people who had a reason to believe him. They had voted for him. And he's not being charged for seditious conspiracy. People who believed their president are. And what they believed is that they believed him when he told them that their will was being subverted by an election being stolen. That may be a false claim. And it may be that there's accountability for that to come. But if you're an ordinary American who on that day believed your president, are you a criminal if you act in response to his words? And if you're angry about your election being stolen, don't we say we're governed by our consent? And if you've breached that compact, doesn't that call for a measured response? And in my view, the January 6th event was not a revolution. It wasn't a rebellion. It meets the technical definition of seditious conspiracy. That is, members of the group agreed to use force to oppose the authority of the United States government. Fine. But let's not pretend they came there with knives, guns, and bombs to blow up a building and bring the government to its knees. They came to stop a steal. And if they were mistaken, oh well, let's move on, because mistakes happen in the passion of politics, and we learn to live with them. But when we demonize the parties that make mistakes and seek to prosecute them, maybe we start to look like a banana republic. Maybe those who say that prosecuting people for their political views is interference with an election, and maybe, just maybe, the tens of millions of people who continue to support Donald Trump are onto something.
Well, we got some questions on X last night. I think people are curious, certainly Norm, about any potential appeals that may be forthcoming on behalf of Biggs and or Rehl and what they can do to help. I've put the Give, Send, Go here on the screen, but perhaps you can just sort of shine some light on what comes next in Joe's case.
So judgment will enter. Judge Kelly said yesterday that after he has sentenced all of the Proud Boys, and he's going to sentence today Dominic Pizzola, and Ethan Nordine. On Tuesday, he'll sentence Enrique Tarrio. Sometime mid midweek next, he will enter judgment in the case. He will reduce to a final order, the judgment of the court after the verdict and sentencing. And once judgment is entered, then the clock begins to run. And each of the defendants will have up to 14 days to file a notice of appeal of their intent to appeal their conviction and the proceedings related to it. That appeal will go to the United States District Court for the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. It'll take about 2 years for that appeal to run its course, meaning for the briefs to be written, for arguments to be had, and for the judges to make their decisions. Thereafter, parties will have opportunity, if they believe they're pressing federal questions, to take their case to the United States Supreme Court, and I intend to do so on behalf of Biggs and Rehl. As far as I'm concerned, the pivotal issue in this case was the use of permitted speech to prosecute men for what happened at a riot. And what do I mean by that? The United States Supreme Court that said as recently as the Counterman versus Colorado decision in June of this year, that we want to protect political speech, even vigorous political speech, even virulent political speech, even ugly political speech. That is the American way. We used to tar and feather, politicians in this country and burn in effigy those in office. If anything like that happened today, the people who did so would be charged as terrorists. We're killing the American spirit at this point. And so I intend to take to the Supreme Court the use of protected speech to prove a conspiracy, because what I think happened in this case is these men were vitriolic in their opinions, and they expressed them lavishly everywhere, but there was no evidence presented of a plan, and the government conceded that they could convict without a plan. This could have been a so-called inchoate or implicit conspiracy that was formed at the moment it took place. But instead, they went back and they told everything that these men had to say and used it as evidence of a criminal intent. And there needs to be a standard or a test to protect political speech from the government's use in this case. Usually speech explains an event. In this case, an event was used to explain the speech. And in reversing that order of proof, the United States government and Judge Kelly, in effect, endorsed a regime in which speech acts, violent speech acts, can be used as evidence of a crime. There has to be a better test in the context of political dissent. So what can you do to help? Condemned USA is an organization that is supporting some of the efforts. I'll be candid with you. They are supporting my efforts with respect to Biggs and Rehl. You can contribute to Condemned USA. They have provided some financial support to me. They've committed to purchasing the trial transcript in this case, which will be $30,000 or $40,000, I think, at a minimum. And they continue. They put me up in a hotel room while I'm here in DC to try to help out, because our firm has taken a tremendous financial beating in this case. Contribute to, as you will, if you will, to those fighting for the J16. I'm in it to win it. I'll be in it for another couple of years. And candidly, I'm worried about how I'll be financed. But I'm going to find a way, because defending speech, defending dissent is the American way. And I don't want to live in a republic of fear. I refuse to do so.
Yep. So I've put the condemnedusa.org is the page you see on the screen right now. And I'm going to pivot back to the Give, Send, Go. You'll see that on the screen now. GiveSendGo.com/Save Joe Biggs, SaveJoeBiggs, for 2 ways to support the appellate process. And as Norm said, I mean, that is a wild cost for the full trial transcript, $30,000 or $40,000.
Well, let's talk about talk about the time. The expenditure of time. I mean, I have devoted probably 8 months of my life to this, and candidly, the financial burden of that has been a substantial impact on my firm. In fact, my firm is dissolving as a result, in part, of the work that has gone into this case. I've had someone leave the firm who I was heavily dependent on, I think in part because of the strains of this. But I'm in it to win it, and I will not be deterred.
Well, you give inspiration to a lot of people, Norm. I am humbled, as I've said before on this stream, but I think this is probably one of my most opportune moments to just extend my gratitude to you, Norm. I see you as a mentor, but I also see you as a leader that people don't necessarily know that they need. And I think it's vastly important that all of us watching here can at least spread the legend of your representation here. 17 years and 15 years respectively. From my vantage, I know that's you're a winner and you wanted something substantially less for these guys. I think we all did. However, when facing down a terrorism enhancement that really just doesn't have a whole lot of logical justification behind it, and staring down a federal Department of Justice that has limitless resources at its disposal, which we talked about in long form. And I think that I have insight to this case that is unique. And I have seen, I think, the full chronology of your representation here, onboarding, and the things that you have to strive against that has nothing to do with representation of the client to get to this point, and all the while maintaining a firm and your duties owing to other clients and staying somewhat sane and showing up for all of these.
Somewhat. Hey, I resemble that remark.
And then showing up every morning, Monday through Friday, for a half hour or more to talk with everybody while you're shouldering that load. So thank you.
Hey, look, it is our republic. I mean, let's never, go out today and read the Declaration of Independence. None of us were here when it was written, but it's written in an inclusive way, and we used to be encouraged in civics classes to regard ourselves as authors of it. And one of the great fictions of the American dream is that we, the people, still govern, and it's a necessary fiction. Even when we don't, we should aspire to, and we should always seek to hold leadership into account or accountable, and we should never be afraid to speak our mind. And, there's an interesting debate. I said at some point yesterday in sentencing arguments that Jefferson had once said, when the government fears, when people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. One reporter called me to task on that, saying, that's not something that Jefferson said. And I did a little research over that on that overnight, and it appears not to be found in any of his writings. The Monticello Institute, which is dedicated to Jefferson's legacy, has scoured his writings and has not found that anywhere. It may, in fact, have arisen in 1914 in a debate about political dissent. Whoever said it, I'll stand corrected, and I appreciate the remark of the reporter. Even if it wasn't Jefferson, I still think there's a point, and that is when we fear the government, there is tyranny, because you fear that knock on the door. You fear the prison sentence for engaging in behavior you think you have a right to do. You fear what will happen next in a public place. You wonder whether you're being followed. When the government fears the people, this saying says, there is liberty. And I do think that it is important for the government to be wary about what we, the people, will do and think next. And the government ought not to be given unlimited resources to impose its will on us. We should be able to take it back, the power that we've delegated to them. We should be able to act up. We should be able to stand out. I'm not endorsing violence. I'm simply saying that it's been part of the American experience from day one. We were created in acts of rebellion. And if we lose a rebellious spirit, we'll lose what makes living in this country worthwhile.
I just wanted to put on the screen here in the cloud with $100 tip over on Rumble.
Wow. Thank you, in the cloud.
Thank you very, very, very much. I'll take that off here, but that's from the Rumble chat. You've got Uncle Pat here. Norm, I want to hang out with you when I grow up. Christopher.
We'll never grow up, Uncle Pat. I've heard about you. Give it up, pal. Give it up.
Christopher Rivaldo, wow, we are with you. Thank you, Norm. You are my hero. Mari says, a mentor and tormentor of the highest order. I love that. I love that. And I, everything that any compliments that we can shower you with on this, it wouldn't be enough. And I don't think that this is anywhere close to being the end. I think, in fact, it took this to get to where we're going, and that is utilizing the appellate process and getting this into a position where there can be greater public visibility and support. I think the big issue that, in the early days, and I think you can confirm this, is crowdsourcing fees and expenses on the way to this trial because of how widespread the prosecutions have been. Literally more than 1,000 defendants, new money being funded to the Department of Justice to bring more cases. And then the average person, Norm, right? And especially those who could make the biggest difference in terms of meaningful contributions, larger money donations to these cases, are absolutely from being even remotely close to it
Well,
because of the environment in which we live.
On the table, I was recruited by another lawyer to be involved in this case, and I worried about legal fees, and I was told, don't worry about it, there'll be crowdsourcing. Well, there wasn't. And the result is that at least at a certain point, the expenses we incurred just for living expenses and whatnot overran what we had received by way of crowdsourcing for payment in this case. That's independent of legal fees. So our firm was required to spend down cash reserves to keep me in this trial for 5 months and for the months that it took to prepare. And I'm committed to finding a way. I will never leave this case. Because this case is about the American experience. It's about America. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no place in the United States I would rather have been than during that trial than standing next to Joe Biggs and Zach Rehl. And I'm honored to have their case on appeal. And to the haters, get over it. Because you know what? Tomorrow, when it's your turn, you won't lose my number. I'll be here for you.
That's right. Well, Norm, I think there's more of this discussion to come. We will be watching to see the other 3 defendants sentencing.
Here's my prediction. I think that today, given the quirks, the government's gotten 50% of what it's asked for thus far in this case. They're asking for 20 for Dominic Pizzola. He didn't get convicted of seditious conspiracy. I predict a sentence in the 9 to 10 year range for him. I think Nordine will come out at 17. Unfortunately, I think Enrique is going to get 20 to 22.
That's right. Well, we'll be here for that. I want to just, one more comment here. Half the guideline sentence, the prosecutors could not be feeling like winners. You gave them hope. Great job. I took the same thing away. And despite what you'll read in headlines from, more, liberal, sympathetic reporters for bigger publications who have been, covering this trial in a way that just kind of plays to the narrative that's being pumped through the airwaves in establishment media. Despite all of that, you can come here for the facts, and you can come. I think what we call that real, and understand what this fight is ultimately about. So again, thank you, Norm. I think we had a couple of other items that we wanted to get to. One in particular, I think we should save. Maybe this is our Labor Day. Maybe this is our Labor Day stream talking about young Vivek and his. Yeah,
you and I I think we have a fundamental disagreement. I'm looking forward to airing that out.
Yeah, right? That'll be fun. There's a video circulating, and then also this made news. The Donald Trump trial in Georgia will be televised. But your gripe is what, Norm? That where's the federal equivalent?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we the people, this is justice being done in our name. Don't play hide the ball with it. Don't make me depend on the New York Times editorial staff to determine what gets printed in the newspaper. I've got a set of eyes. If I see something, I'm going to say something. What I want to see is the trial of the United States of America versus Donald Trump.
And I think everybody wants to see that as well. So not sure what it's going to take to do that, but at least it will be. Here's what I wanted to show with respect to that last thing. Judge Scott McAfee in Georgia actually has a YouTube channel. Look at this. And so this is where
but a hound dog.
Look, this is where it would be streamed. The only thing that I don't like about this is how many more subscribers he has than we do, with like a tenth of the video content. So we got to fix that. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. This is your reminder. Like the video, hit the subscribe button. But here's where we will see all of the Trump action. Very high production quality, good stuff here from Judge Scott McAfee's channel. But anyway, Norm, we will do away with this. We will stop the stream. I know you've had a long week. Go catch your train, and I
want to go home. I want to get ready for University of Michigan tomorrow at noon. Go Blue! This is the year that I'm hoping for a national championship.
Yeah, well, you can keep hoping.
I know. I do every year. I mean, I'm a fan. What can I tell you? I bleed maize and blue.
See you next week, Norm. We'll do a stream on Monday. I'll see you.
All right, cool. All right, bye.